jumping in a touch late to Tezuka versus Sakaea for Triad Wars 14, round 2. In general, Tezuka has been the stronger tournament player, but Sakaea has been really playing great recently, I think. If we look at the hands first, Tezuka played the 2986, Sakaea has played the 7166. I think Tezuka has a pretty professional hand, 9-8 corners for 3 corners, you can only use 3 level 8s, and then a 2676 basically covers the 4th corner, and then a side-to-side card that has some ability to plus wall said corners. For instance, if written 9 can be retaken by 5647. You'll also notice he specifically chose to grab elementals in some places. For instance, 2986 has a pairing. I used it in my game, 8629. He has instead opted for 9628, which I think is not as natural a pair in general, but has the benefit of having an elemental on it. I tend to think this is not something you should particularly try for, but that is just my opinion. Sakaea, on the other hand, has balanced her hand, but I think having the 2-9-8 corners has balanced their hand, my bad. Sakaea has balanced their hand. The 4489 and 9158 are on the same side of the board, and that can make it easy to end up with directional issues later in the game. Sakaea also played a really interesting starter of 7166 and 9, which I think is really unlucky to be hurt by elemental here, or sort of helped, sort of hurt, because you can see both hands have a potential down weakness. Tezuka's has 9s in up and to the right, but not to the left or down, 8s to the left and down. Sakaea's hand has 9s left and up, and an 8 to the right and an 8 down. So they both have this down weakness. So 7166 actually couldn't be captured by either person's hand in 6. It also conceded plus wall potential to 9628 and 8. Tez instead decided to go with 2986, but this potentially concedes something else, right? This is his only card with an 8 facing down, and that potentially gives Sakaea play. And so while I am skeptical of Sakaea's initial moves, I am skeptical of a corner starter you can't take back, it feels like Tezuka can take stuff here, there is also a very good chance they are successfully running Tezuka out of downward power. And so even moves that, have certain drawbacks can obviously have other strengths. And here the strength is, Tez is very likely to quickly run out of downwards directional strength. I think one downside of using 2986 was it uses up his most powerful downward card. If the bottom of the board is going to fill up, which was very likely because Sakaea didn't have a recapture in 6, so 7 was the most likely move for them to make, and indeed they did. 2986 is likely to be a really good sweeper. But the upside of it is a very low number facing up. So Tez could, for instance, play something like 2676 and 6, which would set up 9628 to have some downward potential with that same. Though at the same time, if you have to use up your 2676 to get that downward potential, you're giving up clear down power to get potential down power. Probably not the greatest of exchanges. So I think right now my instinct is sort of Tezuka should be ahead here, but probably not enough to win. Just because it is so easy to not have the required downward power. And also, if you do something like 2676 and 7, now I'm not sure Sakaea can get away with this, but it could be Sakaea can play like 6761 and 1 and just be safe there. And then, Tez does have double captures in 5, say with 5647. And that doesn't concede an immediate combo, though it's very close to doing so. So my line's 27676 in 4, 6761 in 1, 5647 in 5. And I feel like 9158 in 6 should tie there. Yeah, looks like it does. 4489 is a pretty strong sweeper in the endgame there. Oh, maybe it loses to 3. You've given up so many cards. Yeah, okay, that doesn't work. But my point was sort of you could even imagine stuff like that working just because Tez does run out of power here. But that does look like it doesn't, in fact, work due to if written 3. Oh. Or due to actually 9, 8, 5, 4, and 3 as well. So if Tez goes in 4, which is probably the main move, in that case, unless Sakaea has a setup in 2, which I do not believe is the case, I think Sakaea probably needs to block 5 there. 6, 7, 6, 1 is a pretty good way to do so, because that's actually just like safe on board, right? I think the most likely move there is Tez goes in 1, because that's safe. But the score's 6-4 Tez there. I think Tez probably wins that. So I'm now thinking 2, 6, 7, 6, and 4 might be a win. It's really hard when you can never do anything useful in 6. And when the card you grabbed in 8 is so vulnerable. Tez could also start in 6. You know, something like 5, 6, 4, 7, and 6 looks fine. You threaten big play in 5. But I think my instinct right now is to go 4. He has picked up neither card. He could also be thinking 5. And based on the lines we've calculated, we haven't seen Sakaea's hand having significant combo potential against moves Tez could play. So if Tez does go in 5, based on what we've looked at, even though we haven't calculated 5 at all, 5 should be better than it would normally be. He may also be going in 6 still. He does go in 5. Very interesting. So this actually does concede 6, 7, 6, 1 in 4 with the plus wall, but Tez presumably intends to combo back with either 9, 6, 2, 8 or 2, 6, 7, 6, and 6. I would guess 9, 6, 2, 8. So the question now is, because Sakaea should not take the combo in 4 immediately, that looks, yeah, like it doesn't work. If Sakaea can set up a combo threat elsewhere, either in 2 or in 6, that can be very strong here. And so I'd be tempted. I would now be looking at 9, 1, 5, 8, and 3. 9, 1, 5, 8, and 3 looks like the way to set up 6, 7, 6, 1 to have 2 very powerful squares. Does it work? Maybe not. I think Tez might be in time to block 4, and because Sakaea has no significant threat in 6, Tez probably does okay there. Yeah, that might just be a win for Tez. In that case, this is probably a very strong move. Well calculated. And I think the starter for Sakaea was the mistake. This looks like a very difficult position to play after that starter. And while, you know, a perfect player could probably find some tie there, it looks like it was a really difficult position. I'm going to pause the recording and be back in a sec, and we'll see what happens later in the game. Well, I feel like a genius right now. This is a great idea. I can just pause recordings and, like, when I run out of things to say and come back. I think I probably shouldn't do this during my own games because, like, even though there can be downtime, I like having the history of my thought processes and that it being a continuous thing. But if I'm commenting on other people's games and I run out of things to say, I should just stop, you know. So Sakaea goes for 6, blocking Tezuka's combo back square, but this gives up a threat in 4, so I have to imagine this is this is going to be a loss. Presumably a 6-4 loss. You know, the kind of line of like, Tez captures in 4, Sakaea captures back from 1, Tez captures in 2, Sakaea captures in 3. That ends up losing 6-4 unless there's a combo somewhere. And I don't foresee that combo happening. So I think Tez got this one. And I think it comes down to an interesting first move, right? A first move that played against Tezuka's weaknesses, but also was a weakness Sakaea shared. So Tez has picked up 2, 6, 7, 6 to calculate the combo chain. In chess, people talk about how you should calculate checks and captures first. And I think some people assume this is because, like, if the check is really good, it's going to be decisive. Or if the capture is good, you know, then you might just get something for free. And I think that's part of it. But another thing I heard articulated recently, and I think says it well, and this might sound obvious, is checks and captures are forcing, right? If you play a check in chess, they must, in one way or another, get their king out of check. Could be moving their king out of the way, it could be blocking the check, it could be capturing the checking piece. But they must respond to it. If you capture something, it is less forced, but they probably have to reply to the capture. Say they capture back or something like that. And, oh, he goes in 3 instead of 4. Yeah, but Sakaea's hand has run out of rightward power, which is something that was sort of somewhat worrisome from the start, is that the 2 9-8 corners both had a rightward weakness. And so when that 7-8 5-6 came out of the hand, there was a potential rightward weakness waiting. And now, in fact, Sakaea has no captures on board, so this might even be, looks like it probably will be a 7-3 win. Yeah, nicely played by Tez. What I was going to say was, and this was about the line in 4, which wouldn't have won by as much, but I believe also won, is one of the reasons to check checks and captures is simply that they're forcing. Is that, you know, there are lots of moves you look at, and the opponent could reply any of a number of things, and evaluating against, you know, 6 possible opposing moves is difficult, right? But if you know, I do this, they do that, if you can force the action, it is much easier to calculate longer lines. And this is some of why I will start calculating just captures in positions where the capture doesn't even look particularly promising. But I'm just like, if I capture, I know they will capture back. And then I can look at the next position and have a pretty high rate of confidence that is in fact the next position. And if I feel my position is worse and I am just trying to get a tie, then by calculating those forcing moves, oh, that's cute. Setting up the threaten 2. Now Tezuka's going to block 2. And I guess that's going to be an 8-2. But this is actually, I think, a smart try, because it at least gives your opponent a chance to make a mistake. So I think this was a nice decision by Sakaea in a position that is losing. And this will lose by a higher score, but it will do so while creating the opportunity for something to go right. And I think that is, in general, a smart decision to make, and probably one I would have missed here. Now, Tezuka's not going to fall for it, so the actual change in equity is not much. But, you know, there's usually at least a tiny chance, and this creates that chance where it wouldn't have existed with other moves. So I think this was a smart decision. But in general, just like, the further you can calculate, the closer you get to the end of the game. And Triple Triad is a short game, right? Each game is only 9 moves. The last move is absolutely forced, so it's really only 8 moves. The 8th move, let's just assume we're calculating the last 2 moves perfectly. Now we're down to a 7-move game. Between many players, those moves are going to be calculated perfectly. We're down to a 6-move game. You could argue in some matchups we get down to a 4 or 5-move game, right? And how many of those moves are you making? If it's a 5-move game, you're making 2 or 3 moves per game. And somehow those 2 or 3 moves are supposed to do enough that you win or hold a tie, or, you know. And the game works, despite being this kind of short in terms of move number of a game. It works and is complicated and is fascinating. And I think that's really, really cool that it succeeds despite being such a short-term game. But that also means if you can calculate forcing lines, you know, if I do this, they have to do that. That's an entire move of the game of your opponents that, like, you've calculated past. That is a huge percentage of the way to having calculated to the end of the game. And so calculating forcing lines, if it can add an extra move to your calculation, can be so valuable, specifically if you are behind and aiming for a tie. It is usually less valuable if you're aiming for a win, because, you know, an unpromising capture is unlikely to be your winning line. But an unpromising capture may well be your tying line, and by letting you calculate multiple moves further than you would in other variations, it can be just hugely powerful in terms of getting a tie. Alright, so Tezuka does get that. Yeah, I think interesting. The move in 9 was a very interesting way to start the game, because it had such a big threat of going in 8 that I think Tezuka was basically obliged to go in 8 himself. And if Sakaea had a recapture in 6, I think that could have been a pretty powerful starter, despite giving up a plus wall in 8 and not having similar combo potential in return. And very nicely done by Tezuka, per usual. This advances Tezuka to the quarterfinals, where I will be playing him. So that should be a good match, because I definitely haven't played Tezuka enough recently. Alrighty. My main takeaway from this video, which is admittedly not about Triple Triad, is maybe I should just pause videos a lot. Like, when I run out of stuff to say, if I'm watching someone else's game, I should just pause the video till a move happens and come back when the move has happened. And that way I think there will be less dead time. Let me know if you think that helps. Cheers.